Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really provocative geopolitical theory, something called the Grand Reversal. We're going to explore the case for what, honestly, most people would call an unthinkable alliance between the United States and China.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with what this unthinkable alliance even means. Then we'll look at the arguments for why it might actually be possible. After that, we'll dig into the huge hurdles in the way, and finally, we'll wrap up with an assessment of how likely this really is. Okay, first up, this idea of an unthinkable alliance. What exactly are we talking about when we say grand reversal?
This whole theory really boils down to one huge question, one that just flies in the face of decades of foreign policy. Could a president, especially a leader like Donald Trump, who's known for shaking things up, actually pivot and see China not as a rival, but as a partner? It's a pretty radical thought, but some analysts believe it might be born out of pure necessity. And the stakes for answering that question? They're just massive. It's all about trying to avoid this thing called the Thucydides Trap. The basic idea comes from ancient Greece, when a rising power, in this case China, challenges a ruling one, like the US. History shows us that war is often the outcome. So the argument here is that a pact could be the off-ramp, the way to avoid a head-on collision. And this isn't just some academic theory. You've got experts like the former Australian Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, saying that figuring this out, finding a way to manage this rivalry, is maybe the single most important challenge the world is facing. This isn't just about two countries. It's about global stability for all of us. Okay, so you're probably thinking, how is this even remotely plausible? Let's get into the arguments for why some people think a deal like this could actually happen. Now, before we get into the details, it's really important to remember that a massive, world-shaking pivot like this, well, it's actually happened before. Think about Richard Nixon in 1972. He was a die-hard anti-communist, and yet he was the one who went to China and opened up relations. It was a total shocker at the time, but it completely redrew the geopolitical map. History shows that these unthinkable moves can and do happen. The case for a deal today kind of builds in three steps. First off, you've got what you could call economic gravity. China's economy is just too huge to sideline. That reality then opens the door to step two, using a big deal to tackle pressing problems back home in the US, like trade imbalances or national debt. And the third piece of the puzzle is the leader himself, the idea that a disruptive negotiator might be willing to make a purely transactional deal that a more traditional leader would never even consider. But, of course, it's not that simple. Not even close. The road to any kind of US-China pact is absolutely filled with huge, powerful roadblocks. And this brings us to the big contradiction, right? How do you reconcile years of really tough rhetoric and a trade war with a sudden move toward partnership? Was all that confrontation the real policy? Or, as some argue, was it all just posturing, a strategy to build up leverage for a huge deal down the line? That's the core puzzle. And beyond just the rhetoric, you have massive structural hurdles. For starters, there's the incredibly thorny issue of Taiwan, a red line for both sides. Then, back in Washington, you have what you might call the foreign policy blob, deep, deep skepticism from the entire establishment. And on top of all that, there's the simple fact that nobody's really sure what China's own endgame is. However, there's a fascinating counter-argument here, and it goes right back to that Nixon playbook. The idea is that a president could just go around the bureaucracy, use a tiny, trusted inner circle for secret talks, just like Nixon and Kissinger did. And if that's the case, then all the public noise and tough talk from other officials, well, it could just be a smokescreen. Intentional noise to distract everyone while the real deal-making happens in secret. So, we've heard the arguments for, we've heard the arguments against. What's the bottom line? Let's get to the final assessment here. According to the analysis we're drawing from, the actual probability of a full-blown strategic alignment is somewhere in the 25 to 35% range. Now, let's be clear. That is not the most likely outcome, but it's not zero either. It's a big enough chance that you really can't just write it off as a total fantasy. And this really captures the tension perfectly. It's a true tug of war. On one side, you've got the pull of a purely transactional approach and really powerful economic reasons to make a deal.
But pulling hard against it are these huge headwinds, that confrontational history, the institutional resistance, and just the incredible complexity and risk of the whole thing.
So here's the crucial takeaway. A full pact, signed and sealed, it's an outside shot. What's seen as more likely is that we'll see elements of this shift. Things like really aggressive, one-off transactional deals on specific issues. We'd probably see continued friction with traditional allies in Europe, and maybe a drift toward a world where the big powers, the US, China, Russia, deal directly, but without any kind of formal alliance.
Which leaves us with this final massive question. Would a move like this be a form of pragmatic new realism, a smart adjustment for a world with multiple great powers? Or would it be an incredibly high-stakes gamble that could throw the entire global order into chaos? A full pact might be unlikely, but just thinking about the possibility forces us to question everything we assume about where the world is heading.